And thank you all thanks everybody for attending our July 20th NSGIC 3D hydrography program for the nation. We appreciate you being here. As you all know, this is a cooperative agreement between NSGIC and USGS, and it's intended to engage state, local governments, private sector partners, all in the derivation of a 3D stream network and hydro units from accurate, high-quality 3-depth LiDAR and IFSAR in Alaska. Oh, I'm just zooming ahead here. Just quickly, I wanted to touch base with everybody on our activities and where we are. The monthly form, as you all should know, is every month, and we post all the presentations as well as a Q&A doc at the NSGIC Learning link. So you will need to log into that learning link, but if you're registered for the workshop, you should have the credentials. We had a 3DHP FTN interest group on June 15th. Those materials have been posted to the NSGIC Learning link, and our next interest group meeting will be during the NSGIC annual meeting. We will have a Data for the Nation breakfast meeting. That'll be Tuesday morning. And please feel free to interrupt if you have questions. I am sorry for jumping around so much. Let me get the link for I've got a couple things to stick into the chat. I'm going to give you the experience inventory link. Please, we encourage you to participate in this. There is a long form and a short form. Thank you to Phil. Also, identify tasks to support 3DHP implementation. We all worked, appreciate your efforts last year on prioritizing the critical factors. And we have developed, we're in the process of developing guidance for 3DHP coordination. The first part 1 was presented at the June 3DHP interest group meeting. And it's just a 2-page document, and I will put that link into the chat for those of you that are interested. And then finally, of course, the 3DHP Info Hub. Phil does a great job of developing and managing that, and that should be your one-stop shop. So we'll put that in the chat as well.
Just to pipe in, if you see something missing or know of some resource that we don't have, please send me an email. Love to add it.
Thank you, Phil. And of course, please enter your questions into the chat at any time during the presentation. And with that, I think we'll move on to our speakers, because you want to hear more about what's going on in Michigan. And I'm going to introduce Mark Holmes. He's a Geospatial Services Manager with Michigan Department of Technology Management and Budget. And I'm going to let Mark introduce his fellow speakers today.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get my slides shared here, I think.
I have to stop first, okay.
All right. Let me just check here. I'm going old school with one laptop screen here. So this should make it easier. And let me turn this into slide mode. All right. Everybody seeing the front page there?
Looks great. Thank you.
Okay. Let me close this over here. Okay. So today we're going to present our statewide GS hydrography project. We did present back to this group, I believe, in February of 2021, where we were just finishing up a pilot and just heading into an RFP phase. And I'll kind of talk about the timeline here in a minute, but I'll have Nick and Jimmy introduce themselves as well. So there's a real partnership, not only amongst the stakeholders in Michigan, but with Michigan State University Remote Sensing and GIS Department and NV5 Geospatial, of working through all the different steps in the process that we've identified here and worked through over the first few months of a multi-year project. So Nick, do you want to start? Just introduce yourself and your background, and then we'll have Jimmy do the same.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nick Weil. I'm a GIS analyst at RS&GIS within Michigan State University. And I'm handling a lot of the workflow methodology, data development setup, and kind of system architecture for this project.
All right, Jimmy, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmy Monhay with NV5 Geospatial. Within the company, I act as an associate team lead within our company's elevation-derived hydrography program, where we specialize in working with USGS's various hydrographic data sets. I have extensive background working with these data for the last 5 years, and as of recently, helping develop and derive the hydrographic flow lines and associated features based on elevation data.
All right, very good. So Nick and Jimmy will be covering a lot of the content here of the process, the methodology, how we're going about things. I'm just going to take a few minutes in the beginning here and just kind of provide an overview tied to the project. And my role as the Geospatial Services Manager, I'm within our Department of Technology Management Budget, which is our state IT department. And we have our GIS office in there, does coordination amongst the state agencies and across the state. So this is a project that we're coordinating and working with a lot of various stakeholders. So speaking of stakeholders, back in 2018, we had a lot of requests or inquiries about improving our hydrography data in Michigan. We actually had 2 data sets then. Well, we didn't have 2. Users were either using the National Hydrography data set, or we had a data set in our Michigan Geographic Framework. They both were derived from quad maps, back in the day. They weren't being updated. At least the state wasn't updating either the MGF layer, other than some stream names here or there. And we did not have an active NHD program going. So the big impetus for those inquiries from some of our state agencies was because we had, or were very close at that time to statewide QL2 LiDAR data, and could we leverage that to improve the positional accuracy of our hydrography data. So that group decided we were just going to move forward with NHD. We weren't going to worry about our framework data set. We would just move forward as we improve the data. We would get that, work with USGS, get that in NHD, and improve that positional accuracy. So that was really the ultimate goal in the beginning, or what the vision was. We did a proof of concept in 2019. We took 3 small areas. We had Michigan State University do some testing in terms of modeling using the QL2 LiDAR data to generate flow lines. And as part of that proof of concept, there was definitely identified a huge need for culverts and acquiring culverts or digitizing culverts for hydro enforcement. So based off that, the focus group agreed, let's move forward to a larger area. We picked the Kalamazoo River watershed. And that was developed out, again, generating the flow lines, looking at the water bodies. We used that to really kind of refine some of our requirements. At the same time, USGS had put out the EDH specs. So we were looking at that. We got ready to publish an RFP in 2021. So our focus group kind of formed off into a smaller advisory group to work on the RFP and work with USGS as well along the way, again, to understand some of those new standards. And then we selected Michigan State University and NV5 back in October and have been working through the initial phases of the project since then. So again, from a vision or ultimate objective in the beginning of the positional accuracy, you can see here where in the dark blue was the NHD, and then from the new LiDAR-derived hydro flow lines in green there, and the improved positional accuracy. As part of the project, the data that's getting generated, it's also generating lower accumulation flow lines, what we're calling non-NHD. So we're going to have data that adheres to the NHD specs, and we'll go into NHD, but we're also going to have additional flow lines that we will manage in our Michigan Geographic Framework. So those lower accumulation flow lines as well will be part of the deliverable and part of the project. And you can see on the left, we're following the different feature coding outlined by the NHD standards. So this slide really depicts a lot of the process. So and MSU or Nick and Jimmy will cover these aspects in more detail, but really left to right here, a lot of outreach. So part of that outreach is gathering that culvert information up front, reaching out to various stakeholders, road commissions, GIS departments, drain commissions, and any organizations that may have some of this GIS data. So we've been doing that over the past couple of years as we move region to region through the next few years in the state, that we want to be able to work in partnership to leverage anything that's been created. And then if we do create additional data, that can be provided back as well. So then just the development of the modeling, the process, the editing, to all the flow lines within there, then getting into quality control, and then conflation, and then moving into the final upload of what would go into NHG and into our Michigan Geographic Framework as well. And part of this is just, again, a lot of communication, coordination as we move through this, not only with Michigan State University and V5, but also our State of Michigan data review team. We've got an advisory group that we put together. So we meet weekly, and especially as we go through this first year of this project in terms of nailing down the methodology and the process, working through the EDH standards, et cetera. And USGS has been a great help through this as we've had questions and our teams had questions. And then part of this data does, USGS does inspections from time to time on it as well, review through different stages. And then in some of these regions, we've identified pre-screen areas where we do a small area to be reviewed because of potentially different topography, different unique elements based off different parts of the state, because the topography does change some of the elements depending where you are in Michigan. So again, we'll dive more into these as we go, and I'm sure a lot of questions may come up that may drive some additional discussion there. One of the big things I want to highlight is that stakeholder engagement. So again, this began all the way back to where we put that focus group together in 2018 from multiple departments within the agencies that worked with hydrography or needed that more accurate data set. So we've got our advisor group, the focus group that we meet with. That's a larger group, meet as needed as we have information to share. Federal agencies, so we mentioned USGS, but we've also been discussing with FEMA and some of their projects, how they may benefit from some of the data as we generate it. So it's not only coordinating what's needed for data and culverts like I discussed and that type of information to help, but also as we move through, there are different projects that could benefit from it. So determining some of our schedule. So we have some watershed localized projects where we've been able to partner a little bit where they can benefit from the data, and also some of these other federal agencies. So National Wetland Inventory, they're doing work. The Fish and Wildlife Service here in Michigan, so we're making sure we coordinate there as well for some of the wetland data that's being created. We can share some of that information, our project team and them, to make things more efficient between those two projects. The Forest Service, so we have National Forest Lands, they've collected culvert data, and just within those lands, coordination when we get those areas of the state. I mentioned some of the drain commissioners, road commissioners, and the data there. Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited, they're doing different projects that are tied to the wetlands or culverts along trails and other items like that. Obviously local and regional government, GIS departments, GIS associations, and the neighboring states. So we've started conversations with the state of Indiana. We're going to be talking to Wisconsin later this week. And we do one of our projects, localized projects, also involves some data that's crossing over into Ohio. But in terms of the coordination with at the HUC 12 level, where to provide data at NHD, we have to have a full HUC 12 to be able to submit. So we want to coordinate and determine how we may be able to complete those so the entire HUC 12 that crosses those neighboring states can get included into the NHD. So a lot of different portions to stakeholder engagement. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Nick to start walking through the data development process. And I'll stop sharing so Nick can share his screen.
Okay.
I think I'll stop sharing. There we go. Hit the right button.
All right, so I'm going to discuss a lot of the data development work that we've been doing. Some of the goals for this project were to generate high quality hydrography data for the entire state, and with that meet these USGS EDH specifications. We're also, in addition, like Mark mentioned, generating these low accumulation lines or drainage ways that will be delivered in addition to the state of Michigan to use within that framework data set, but won't be conflated into NHD. You can kind of see an example of that, the image on the right-hand side there, some of those extra tributaries showing up. In order to accomplish this data development goal, we need some base source data. This is acquired primarily through the state's MySIL program. We have the 3-depth QL2 LiDAR, and we're using the derived digital elevation models. Those are in their native 2-foot resolution for the entire state. We're also using the break lines, which were developed by the LiDAR collection vendor, and those are going to be useful for our water body area extraction. You can see some examples of that there. And for the most part, those have been really accurate lines coming to us that we can kind of use straight into our process. Mark touched on partner data. That's been a huge component of this project. There have been a lot of different culvert inventories happening in the state, and I'll say culverts dozens of times during this presentation. It's one of the only things we've been thinking about for years as we work through the different stages of pilot projects and things. It's all culverts. That's the base of figuring out how the water is going to flow and getting that information correct. So we've got some different culvert inventories going on across the state in different departments. MDOT, our Department of Transportation, has been doing one, the Department of Natural Resources, and then Eagle, Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. So we kind of have this network across the state of different types of culverts being collected. The stream crossing survey was done. These came in as points, a lot of culvert data coming as points. And so we're just kind of amassing all of that and using it as we fine tune and develop our own master culvert data set to be able to hydro enforce our DEMs. In addition to some of these culvert inventories, we are getting a lot of water body information from NWI, National Wetlands Inventory. And so we've been coordinating with them to kind of align our data needs and meet the same specifications. And that kind of leads us into this overall data creation process once we've gathered what data is already available. So we start with our culvert inventory as the first step. Then on the top, we do this hydro enforcement to get our DEM to flow properly, work through flow line creation, editing, and then QC. And in parallel to that, we're doing our polygon development. So water bodies, that's getting edited, QC'd, then all brought together. We do kind of the post-processing that I'll go into more detail on, and then we deliver. So starting again with culverts, we have, you can see from this screenshot, all this reference data that we're starting with. So we've got points and lines. These are from various sources and with various degrees of accuracy. Some come in with 30 different field attributes describing every feature of that culvert, and some of them are 30 feet off and kind of not quite right. So we kind of use that as some ancillary data. Some of it we can just directly put into our culvert database. There's just a lot of manual digitization, believe it or not. We've been through a number of different processes to try and automate where culverts might exist. And we found that they just don't work that well. And when you miss a culvert, it creates a lot of problems downstream, so to speak. So we have to make sure that we're getting all of them. So we have a grid set up, and we review the DEM grid by grid to make sure that we're getting all the culverts, and then also assigning the right attributes to them as far as what sort of a culvert it is, which is useful for the state to have as that deliverable. So in order to do that, we've got our DEM, we use a hill shade, and then we turn on DRA so that we can really see all the differences, minor differences in elevation, figure out where those culverts should be. We're also pulling in the most recent high-res imagery to kind of assist with that, even though everything is really based on the DEM and what that looks like when it was collected. As far as the types of culverts, we're looking at road culverts, driveways, field access points, both from the road and within fields. And then also what we've dubbed pseudo culverts. So these are just any other barriers to flow. Maybe a tree fell over a stream during the LiDAR collection and that showed up. So we need to kind of break through that to show how the water is actually able to flow through. And the end result is a very comprehensive culvert data set for the state. You can see just some examples here of the culverts, how they look on the DEM, and what our lines look like that we are using to kind of break through and hydro-enforce that elevation model. So lots and lots of culverts everywhere, all over. Another portion of the process is working with the polygon data. Like we said, we're bringing together all these existing data sets. So NWI, our break lines from the LiDAR, and then whatever community data may be available. We're doing pre-processing to be able to bring those into one data set. Then we go through and do any edits that are necessary, make sure that the polygons that we have are meeting EDH specs, fixing any errors in positional accuracy, all of that kind of stuff. Then we do our post-processing, make sure that everything is in the right Z space and all the F codes are assigned properly, stuff like that. And then we do a review and QC of those data. Same thing with the lines. We're doing our DEM pre-processing. So that's the hydro enforcement from the culverts. Then we go through the flow accumulation process and get our vector flow lines from that. Then we do pre-processing there, which is kind of smoothing, reducing the density of vertices, dropping out extra lines that maybe were at a lower flow accumulation. Then we move into the editing phase. We're actually working with those lines, going through assigning F codes, making sure we've got vertices at intersections and breaking out culverts as needed, that whole process. And then we do post-processing, which is again looking at the Z space and getting all of that straightened out. Once we finish that process, we again review and do our QC. So here's a little bit before and after of the polygons. You can see the original NHD water bodies in orange and what we're deriving from EDH in blue. And things look much better. A lot more data and a lot more accurate data. And then here again with the lines, NHD in orange, EDH in blue. And then when you bring everything together, this is NHD, and then this is what we're creating from our EDH process. So we've got much more density, more information, and more accurate. There's a lot of challenges that we've encountered as we've worked through this process. The first being there's a ton of data. I mean, it is just gigs and gigs of DEMs, and we're generating hundreds of thousands of culverts, and then moving through the process of developing all of these flow lines and water bodies. So there's a lot to process and store. The source data is very precise, which is really great, but you also get all these lumps and bumps in the landscape that may or may not be there. Maybe it was just a kind of hillock of vegetation, and that causes some problems that really aren't there on the landscape, stopping water. So that can be a pain to deal with. There have been some errors in the source data, problems with break lines, maybe some DEM anomalies or noise. We had some missing pixels in a DEM we got from USGS, and they were able to get those reinserted and fixed. You can see this example on the right. That whole area is not open water, as the break line would suggest. Culverts have been a challenge. It's just a lot of work to look at everything and collect all of those and make sure they're right. We don't want to create culverts where there aren't any in reality. And then urban areas have also been a challenge. I mean, we are modeling on-ground flow based on elevation. And so when something goes into a storm system, you have no idea where it's going to go. So you can see in the screenshot, you've got a kind of a very obvious open drain here, culvert, and then it enters this urban area, and I assume it's trying to get down to this low area, but we don't know how it gets there. So that's been a challenge of what way to go and how to make those things into a network when we're not really sure. Aside from data challenges, there's also been some process challenges. We found that order of operations, it is incredibly important. The lines affect the polygons and vice versa. Our line and polygon intersections must coincide and have the same Z value. And so when you're trying to shift one or the other, you've got to make sure that everything stays in that connected network. Data smoothing can be very complicated. One of the specs is that vertices cannot be closer than 1.5 meters. So if you're trying to remove vertices, sometimes you shift your line out of the channel because you've dropped out a key vertex. So that's something to think about. Sometimes if there's an error identified, you may have to go back multiple steps in the process to be able to fix it, and then rerun a lot of these setting your Z values and some of the kind of network topology stuff. We had a lot of discussions on monotonicity and the polygon vertex assignment, just making sure that everything is moving downhill and you're never above the DEM surface. And then sometimes the EDH specifications are ahead of the available standard tools. This kind of framework was developed in Alaska and now moving down to CONUS. It's a different set of data, more high resolution. And so some of the processes to work through that haven't quite caught up, but it's getting there. And then these specs, again, haven't been tested on all landscapes. So things in Michigan are different than other places. And looking at that qualitatively versus quantitatively, quantitative is better in our opinion, and just trying to make sure that we're working in a way that makes sense again and again and is repeatable. So with that, I will hand things over to Jimmy.
Great, Nick. Thank you so much. Let me share my end of the screen here. Great. So with that presentation, we've gone over Michigan State University's collection and developmental processes to generate an updated elevation-derived hydrography data set. We've also gone through how they work with both the USGS and the state of Michigan to ensure compliance with those respective target data sets. This is the point where NV5 geospatial steps in. Here we receive that reviewed and finalized data, And that's where we can start managing the workflow components for the quality control of the interim features, as well as the pre-conflation processes that are necessary to ingest the updated hydrography into both the USGS's National Hydrography Dataset, as well as State of Michigan's Geographic Framework. Here we'll also...
Jimmy, you're not sharing, or I'm not seeing it anyway.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark.
There
Is
we
that better for everyone?
Perfect.
Thank you. At this point, we'll also be using Michigan State's data to delineate and refine the associated watershed boundaries to result in a fully aligned and integrated hydrography data set. This slide provides an overview of our general workflow to transform the data into the appropriate formats for conflation into the target data sets. We begin by confirming the receipt of the reviewed and approved hydrography data from Michigan State. That data immediately goes through our internally established QA and QC processes for all feature geometries. Once QC'd, the data can then be used to update the associated watershed boundaries. In parallel, we transfer the required and additional attributes into a single integrated schema, and this improves efficiency down the road for the following pre-conflation processes. The pre-conflation for both the MGF and the NHD essentially extracts the desired feature geometries as well as the attributes to prepare for the individual conflation of the data into the NHD and the MGF. Once the data sets are isolated, the final step for delivery is conflation into the two target data sets. The data is delivered in USGS's three-dimensional hydrography program compliance schema by predetermined subregion groupings. Each of these subregion contains anywhere between 1 and 5 8-digit hydrologic units, or HUC8s, and these HUC8s provide an individual extent to perform the preceding QC, watershed boundary delineation, and conflation steps. NV5G's automated QC checks are used to ensure feature integrity and completeness to prepare for dataset conflation. Here I've provided some examples of what we're reviewing for. Some of those include vertex spacing to meet the USGS specs, where vertices are to be spaced no less than 1.5 meters apart. Z-value monotonicity review ensures that the flowline elevation values trend downhill from the headwaters down to the drainage outlets. We review for topological connectivity throughout the flowline network. We calculate the updated flowline density compared to the existing NHD to verify that all the prominent legacy features are represented, such as flowlines tagged with names from the geographic names information systems. We also ensure the flowlines are appropriately integrated with the water body and area polygons to correctly classify streams. That's shown here in this figure to the right. Here we can see that all the flow lines within this particular water body polygon have been attributed as artificial paths as required by USGS specs. Our QC process includes a lot of similar checks that are employed by USGS during the NHD conflation and update process, but it's good to note here that redundancy at this stage could definitely prevent having to rework the data later in the workflow. So we believe this ultimately increases the process efficiency. Once we've ensured that the quality of the hydrography data is complete, we can use the elevation derived flow lines to elevate or to generate the updated watershed boundaries. We begin the process by identifying the drainage points of each of the flow line networks for the existing 12-digit hydrologic units. That pour point is used to trace all flow lines upstream from the outlet to aggregate all contributing flow line features for each individual unit. The isolated drainage networks are used as an input for our proprietary workflow to generate a new watershed boundary delineation based on the provided elevation data. We QC these automated delineations by refining the confluences and the boundary outlets per USGS's watershed boundary dataset guidance. We also ensure that the delineations are digitized along topographic ridges. We create a topology to avoid any gaps between hydrologic unit boundaries. And finally, the geometric features of the boundaries are put through a smoothing process to remove any sort of raster artifacts from the delineation process. Once the geometries are finalized, we prepare the new watershed boundary features for State of Michigan review, as well as subsequent watershed boundary dataset conflation. And this process includes generating line feature classes from the updated HUC12 polygons. And Excuse me. Having these new delineations also gives us another opportunity to further QC the flow lines that were passed by MSU to ensure the flow line headwaters do not cross over the identified topographic ridges. Both the original and the updated watershed boundary data sets are loaded into a web reviewer for stakeholder feedback. To prepare for hydrographic data set conflation, we transfer the necessary and requested attributes to satisfy all stakeholder requirements. We begin with the 3D HP schema, which is how the data set was delivered by MSU. This schema holds all of the elevation attributes, which will be transferred to the final MGF hydrography data set. The schema provides a foundation for a singular data set with an integrated schema, combining the 3D HP, the NHD, and any additional MGF attributes for all hydrographic features. This comprehensive schema, integrating all of the stakeholder specifications, will help preserve the combined granularity and complexity of the target data sets as defined by the state of Michigan and the USGS. We use an extract, transfer, and load process to allow for transformations between the integrated schema and the two target data sets, which will isolate and maintain attributes that are necessary for the final conflation into the National Hydrography Dataset and the Michigan Geographic Framework. The final NHD dataset will include all domains and attributes that are necessary for USGS's dataset conflation, whereas the MGF dataset will append additional attributes requested by the state of Michigan and all other stakeholders in conjunction with the NHD and the 3DHB. So as we mentioned earlier, the MGF hydrography dataset will include the combined domains from the 3DHP and the NHD, but it will also include additional fields for requested attributes. Some of these include stream temperature, stream order, as well as maximum and average slope values. Certain attributes stemming from the NHD, such as reach codes, as well as feature names, will be transferred after the NHD conflation process. This will allow for the MGF hydrography dataset to directly relate to USGS's NHD. Before we deliver the final dataset for MGF conflation, the data must be reviewed, as Mark mentioned, by State of Michigan review team to ensure the presence and accuracy of all feature attributes. Our team has built a web portal using ArcGIS Online, where State of Michigan stakeholders can inspect the data for completion and feedback whenever necessary. Preparing for ingestion into the NHD begins with the same ETL process that we use to isolate the domains and attributes necessary for dataset completion. Further preparation includes removing any headwater features of low flow accumulation, which will cause the datasets to differ slightly in density. The data will be reprojected to the North American Albers equal area projection to prevent inadvertent geometric transformations and to match the current NHD projection system. The hydrography data will be run through USGS's pre-conflation QA and QC tools to make sure the data meets the basic NHD requirements. And some of these include attribute compliance, topologic integrity, flow direction assignment, as well as network connectivity. This slide gives a general summary of the standard workflow that integrates both USGS's specified tools, as well as some best practices for bulk updating the NHD with new features, resulting in a formal acceptance into the national database. Successful completion of this full workflow ensures that the resulting data are fully compliant for NHD integration. One of the key benefits of this workflow is that all bulk updates to the NHD go through several layers of QC, and this QC process is mandatory before the data can be conflated to the national dataset. There's an initial, interim, as well as a final QC review that are utilized prior to submission to the NHD. Beginning with the newly generated hydrography, the data is loaded into the NHD schema, and it must pass those specified QC checks before it can even be introduced to the geoconflation workflow. Through the conflation process, the conflation tool will enforce QC measures at specific points where the tool checks its own application of NHD source information, and it directs the user to manually intervene where errors or uncertainty occurs. The conflation tool will not allow for the workflow to progress beyond the current substep until the user has resolved all mandatory interventions. Once the data has been confirmed by the pre-conflation QC checks, they can move to the actual geoconflation phase of the overall NHD update workflow. Conflation essentially is a set of processes that spatially compares geometries of two coincident data sets and transfers the attributes of the legacy data set to the updated data set. And thereby it creates a data set with differing geometries and transferred attributes. The tool uses spatial alignment to match related features, and this allows us to maintain certain attributes such as reach codes, permanent identifiers, and geographic names. Once the geoconflation process is complete and everything has been successfully transferred to an NHD checkout replica data set, we can now begin the final stage of the update process. And this involves using USGS's NHD update tool. The tool is a standard desktop application that all stewards, including the USGS, use to transact data with the NHD production database, and it's required for anyone wanting to modify any sort of NHD content. The tool connects to USGS's various web services to validate GNIS attributes, reach codes, and flow integrity between hydrologic units. It also enforces NHD schema requirements, such as certain feature-to-feature attributes and topology rules. Once the data have been passed through the update tool to the production database, the data will be publicly available to all hydro stewards to manage subsequent updates beyond the scope of this project. And the final step will be to relate the Michigan Geographic Framework elevation-derived hydrography data to the updated NHD. The USGS geoconflation and update processes that I just went over provides the remaining NHD attributes that can be transferred to the final MGF hydrography data. Those attributes, such as the reach codes, GNIS names, and permanent identifiers, will be extracted, then transferred to Michigan's hydrography so that both data sets are reconciled to match one another. Once that final attribute transfer is complete, the NHD and MGF datasets are virtually related and can be used by their respective data stewards.
All right, so that provides a full view as terms of the process and overview of what our project to date entails. We are, I think at this point, we're estimating probably a 5 to 6 year project. We've gotten through the pilot and are working through our first regions here. So, we continue some of the things we saw as the challenges that have been mentioned here, working through those and making adjustments. And, we feel as we start moving through regions of the state, we'll start to, really get this process in check and moving along. So, Lynn, did you want me to answer a couple of questions I saw in the chat?
Yeah, I can feed them to you. I've been recording them.
Okay.
Let me do some screen management here.
Should say I'll coordinate the questions because I need to hand a couple of them
Right, you use that team. All right, you're still not seeing the right screen, are you? You're seeing working view. Let me go ahead and throw out questions while I'm trying to get to the right screen. I believe the first question was from Christina Kellum in Washington, and she wanted to know, what role does your Hydro Advisory Committee play, and what types of things do they advise on?
Sure. Yeah. So our advisory committee is about 8 to 10 folks from multiple state agencies on there. We meet weekly, sometimes a couple of times a week at this point through the project, because we've been working through the methodologies and the through the pilot. So this group has been fantastic in terms of being available, providing input, feedback, those types of things. So some of the things that we do in terms of review and feedback are working with the team on reviewing the schema. And Jimmy mentioned there were some additional attributes that were wanted to be added. So that was feedback provided by the advisory committee. Reviewing deliverables. So we saw the viewer for the conflation part coming up. So there'll be some of the advisory committee will be involved in some of the review of the MSU data through a viewer there as well. So that's another one of the roles. Just decision points through the project. So we put together our requirements that drove the requirements into the RFP and in the scopes of work. But as we work through the pilot area, then as we're going through the first regions here, things have come up. We're focused on the water bodies, water areas, flow lines were the key, but things came up around sinks and dams and weirs. So we had to make decisions of how we wanted to address those as an example. So, any decision points that come up along, maybe our vendor teams that need some questions answered along the way. So that's the advisory committee that discusses that and comes to providing direction. And then also data stewardship, so long-term data maintenance. So one of the big pieces we want to do as we get regions delivered here is start and make sure we have a workflow in place, data governance in place to be able to make updates in the future. So the advisory committee has been meeting and we're working with NV5 on a long-term data maintenance plan. So that's another role of the advisory committee.
Great. Eric Jesperson wanted to know if in your engagement, have you had any contact or access with the Army Corps of Engineers?
I have not, but I'll ask Nick. Nick, has there been anything come up with the Army Corps that you guys have either heard from them in outreach or reached out to them?
I am not aware of getting anything from them. I know there was some discussion of them potentially becoming the stewards of the dam information and to what extent that would be housed in EDH as it moves forward. We weren't quite sure. But as far as getting data from them, I have not seen anything, and I don't know if we have a contact there that we've worked with. So.
John Derry had a question about your minimum size, and Nick, you responded to that. Would you like to elaborate for the group?
Yeah, the minimum size for water bodies. The USGS has a document read rules to kind of describing all of the capture conditions for the different features. So if you're working on EDH, you're going to be looking at that a lot, and the specific for those features is where the shortest axis is equal to or greater than 100 feet.
Great. I had a quick question. You talked about applying the EDH specification and about its ability to apply and conform to the LiDAR data. Do you provide feedback to the EDH specification team, or what do you do with this knowledge that you're gaining?
You're asking if we provide feedback?
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of a conversation back and forth. We have a USGS representative on all of our meetings, and they're doing kind of the QC as we move around the state and making sure that our data are meeting their specs. So it's kind of a very back and forth conversation as we're figuring out what the specs mean and the best way to meet them.
Great.
Yeah, working through our USGS liaison.
Yes.
Okay. Mike asked, Mike asked if one of the USGS folks would comment on the line and polygon intersection. And Dave, you responded. Did you want to comment, elaborate on your answer, or? I'm sorry, the question was, can one of the USGS folks on the call confirm whether line and polygon intersections must share Z values at the intersection point? And Dave responded, yes, Z values must match the vertex intersecting the polygon from the polyline. And Dave, if you wanted to add anything else, please.
No, they pretty much want all of the intersecting vertices, whether it be a vertex that's going into matching up with a polygon, or whether it's a confluence of two different features. They want those Z values to match.
Great. John Derry had a question about the web reviewer and whether it operates as a markup tool.
So this is Tim Marcella with NV5 Geospatial. I'm the project manager for our component of this work. There are actually two web reviewers. Michigan State University is running one for getting comments, yes, in form of markups on the line work and polygon work they're doing. And then we are running a web viewer that is, again, to allow the stakeholders and others to provide commentary mainly on the attribution component that we're managing. We are also loading in the updated watershed boundary data sets. Those are more for context and just to make the stakeholders aware of changes that are going to be forthcoming as we push that data into the national data set. But since it is really derived from the spatial data, there's not a lot of room for manually manipulating the watershed boundary updates. Hope that answers that question.
And if you want to elaborate on your question or would like additional information, please feel free to jump in. Eric asked if you could elaborate on the culvert database. Is it thin or detailed attribution? What kind of attributes you have? Owner, pipe size, invert, and the maintenance plans.
Yeah, so it's not a very detailed database. We're typing the culverts as we draw them as either road, driveway, off-road, or pseudo culverts. And then we're being very accurate with their placement. Like I mentioned, some of the data we're collecting has, dozens of attributes with all kinds of details about the culvert feature and that kind of stuff, but we're not able to, there's no field component to this project. So we're just doing location information for the most part. And then that is getting transferred over to the state of Michigan as a deliverable, and any kind of maintenance would be handled on their end.
And we have a separate endeavor with our Michigan Geographic Framework of pulling in culvert data with more attributes, not down to the asset management level, that this would remain at the, the local organization is using it, but a few more details like pipe size, those types of things. And we'll take the MSU of what they've collected and do a comparison and try to add in, anything that's missing or driveway culverts, those kinds of things, which will all be coded, as Nick said. So there's an extra objective outside of this project of a culvert inventory with more detailed attributes in the future. not imminent right now.
Okay. All right, we're going to start with the Phil Worrell questions. First of all, how do you determine what is low accumulation flow line, and are these drainage way features?
So the low accumulation lines, we're kind of zeroing in on a threshold that of accumulation that gets all of the EDH features that we need. Right now we're in the 100 to 200,000 pixel range, depending on the landscape and things like that. So we're always shooting to get more than what's necessary for EDH, and then keeping those additional low accumulation lines as an extra deliverable to the state of Michigan.
And then how and when do you assign stream periodicity to new flow lines that are not drainage ways? And are you validating that conflated periodicity?
That is not a process that I've been involved with. So I really can't speak to that.
Anybody else from the team have a comment on that? Okay, and then Phil also asked if you're updating the wetlands in NWI, and Josh adds on, are you updating the swamp marsh features in NHD? So why don't we go with the NWI first? Are you updating the wetlands in your NWI?
So we're working with the NWI team. Wetlands are not being included in the products that we're creating. So we're taking the water body data that they're generating and then making sure that it conforms to EDH specs. So that's kind of the relationship that we have.
I am going to take a break real quick because, as always, we try to tell folks that we will close this out by 4 p.m. and then have an extra 30 minutes for those that do like to stay on the line. So with that said, I just wanted to, we'll get back to these questions for sure, but I do want to, and we've got some inventory question or interview questions, and we'll get to those as well. First of all, I want to thank all of the speakers. I appreciate your time and energy. And as Mark said, Michigan was our kickoff 3DHP forum in February of 21. So we appreciate them coming back and touching base with us, and we appreciate the work that he and his team are doing. Just as a quick reminder, the forum is the third Wednesday of the month from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern. Sorry about the Central Time mix-up. I hope everybody got the information. And we do have a forum scheduled for August 17th. That'll be our next forum. And USGS will be talking to us about making that transition from NHD to 3DHP, at least the current status. So we're not there yet, but where we're going. So with that, anybody that needs to check off, please do. But there are a lot more questions in the chat, so we'll continue with our presentation team and following these questions. Josh asked if you were if you're updating the swamp marsh features in NHD.
No, we are not doing swamp marsh features. That's going to be in the NWI wetland inventory.
And then Phil asked, are you using pseudo culverts to fix flow versus fixing the original point cloud in DEM? Is orthoimagery used to map or adjust water edges versus the DEM?
So the pseudo culverts are used to fix flow. I mean, we're not saying that something is wrong with the original DEM. There's just something there that's stopping flow. So that's something that we're using internally to generate our flow lines. And then have that hydro-enforced DEM that can be used in the future for any kind of hydrologic modeling, but it's not going back to USGS or something as a DEM fix. And then we are using orthoimagery as kind of an ancillary data set. Everything when it's being reviewed by USGS is based on the DEM. So that's kind of what it comes down to. If there's some sort of a major change that happened, I know we've been in discussions with them. For instance, there was a location where we know that a dam had been removed after the LiDAR collection had taken place. And so we included that in our collection report and did not capture the dam feature. So some of those kind of outside knowledge pieces are being used, but really it comes down to the DEM at the time of collection and what that shows.
And then does NV5 check in, update the final HUC 12 and WBD in the master database, or does USGS staff do this?
Yes, NV5 does have fully trained staff that are able to interact with the national watershed boundary data set. So we are doing the transactions via the WBD update tool to submit the updated delineations to USGS.
And then Lorraine asked, are you working with local city and county data sets?
As far as our kind of collecting stakeholder data, we're getting any data from anyone that's willing to share it. Some people have wanted to hold on to the things they've collected, but for the most part, people, city and county groups have been very forthcoming in providing any data that they have. It is kind of a patchwork of really, really good data and really not so good data. So kind of requires a little bit of QC on our part to say how best to use each data set that we gather. But in cooperation with people at State of Michigan, there've been a lot of local data provided that's very useful.
Lorraine asked, oh, no, we already got that one. I'm not sure what Phil's asking. What's your total contracted? Phil?
I can answer that one.
Oh, okay, you understand it. Great.
So as I'd say, still estimated, we have contracted, but as we go through the pilot and other things, there may be things that we need to adjust along. Okay, so 3 to 4 million for the multiple years we talked about as of, based on what we know right now.
Okay, project contract. Thank you. Eric asked, what kind of discussions are you having about urban areas? Any distinctions between minor or complex urban areas? Any MS4 program interactions or engagement?
From a flow line perspective, we've been discussing how to handle the urban locations, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was a low confidence line feature that is available to use. So if we know that water is flowing in one point and then goes into an urban area and then exits into another known feature, we can use that code to kind of just create a line to keep that network. And then we haven't really had any distinctions between minor or complex, and I do not know what MS4 is, so I can't answer that.
All right. Jim Gigliano asked, what's the conundrum part of the title? Oh, we didn't see our images, did we? What are the... Mark?
Well, at least from the team's point of view here, it was more on some of the things that we've run into that we've had to work through, be it getting some more details, around the specifications and how they apply to, what we were seeing in some of the early areas, to determine how to, from MSU's standpoint, collecting that data, how to proceed with some of the collection. We've had, I talked about the dams, weirs, sinks, and how we want to include that or hold some of that off for our data maintenance process in the future. Some of the we're talking right now about ditches. So, every roadway has lower elevation on each side. That's a ditch that may not have water flow in it for many years. How do we handle some of those things? Those are some of the discussions, going on right now. So the advisory committee has to take a look at these things. I don't know, Jimmy or Nick or Tim, if there's other ones, or Chris Steffes, our project manager, is on here. She's pretty in tune, so she tracks all of these things. But any other things that you want to share tied to, beyond the challenges that we've already talked about? It probably ties into the other question here, where are the biggest unanticipated issues, kind of falls into there too.
Mm-hmm.
I think you pretty much hit it, Mark. Hi to everyone. This is Chris Steffes. most of it is really involved with understanding specifications for EDH, and most of it is extremely clear, but we have to talk through that because the USGS information is clear in many ways and is there's a lot of data there. And so what I think we appreciate in this process is having the CONUS team around to be able to meet and discuss some of the challenges we're finding, and for anything that seems just a little bit requiring more clarification, they're there to help for that, and they've been really good about that. So it's things like that. Sometimes talking about some of the GMIs that are being used in the data development process, and hydroflattened surfaces has been another topic area that we're talking about as well. And I think it's to make sure that the end result, while we are spanning across Michigan State data, USGS review, all of whom use somewhat different tools, and then B5 with their quality control checks, to make sure that there is much alignment as we possibly can get to get the best result possible. Hope that helps.
Would you all like to I think you're touching on this, Chris, but what are the biggest unanticipated issues?
I think
that was pretty much your point.
Well, as a project manager, all we think about is the schedule and the cost for the most part, but that is something that's impacted. And I think the big thing that we learned along the way is to make sure that we accommodate time to be able to get appropriate reviews, and to make sure, because we're kind of, I'm going to say leading the EDH world, but we really want this data. It matters a lot. And so I think some of it is we have questions, and it takes some time to get a resolution to things, because we want to really think through them well. The USGS wants to think through them really well. So, I think from a project management perspective, that can become a little bit of a challenge based on the fact that we have dedicated resources for specific amounts of time based on the RFP.
Any of the other team want to chime in on these unanticipated issues?
Sure, I can sort of continue regarding the timeline and making sure that we're engaging with the various review teams, both from USGS and the state of Michigan. It's no longer an unanticipated. We're slowly learning in order to comply with the best practices to make sure that the data is ingested into the NHD appropriately. We also have to make sure that the timelines line up with getting the watershed boundaries delineated and approved by USDS, because that allows for the appropriate conflation and reach code allocation of the flow lines that will ultimately be ingested into the NHD. So making sure that those review periods line up with the actual review of USGS formally and getting everything into the data sets is a bit of a complicated situation, but we are slowly learning how to manage all of those timelines.
Excellent. Phil says he doesn't see mention of integrating field tiles or storm sewer networks. Are you guys addressing those issues?
We're focused on overland flow, and since it's elevation derived hydrography, underground tiles don't have to follow what the elevation tells us. So that's kind of a separate task.
Yeah, when we put out the RFP, we determined we weren't going to go in looking at including stormwater systems at this point. We weren't sure how much data sharing we would get from those authorities. So we just thought maybe in the future, but not part of this bill.
What about disconnected flow lines flowing into a closed low?
So according to the EDH specs, if a stream disappears, you capture at the point of disappearance, and then if it reappears, you capture again. So we're just going with EDH specs for any of those kind of situations.
And that is further cascaded and documented as well in the watershed boundary data sets. We're able to identify those areas where there are disconnected networks. And as long as everything is coded and the features are present to identify those areas, then that complies with the EDH and NHD specifications.
Excellent. Jim wants to know if your RFP is online. I thought you shared that before, Mark, didn't you?
It should be out there. I mean, all the even closed bids are out there. Bidformichigan.com is the site. I'm actually on it right now, trying to search it. It's never the easiest one to search when the bid's closed. So, but it's
well, we can. I can follow up with you and get that link into the Q&A if you like.
okay.
Okay. And then I guess, Phil, you have a question back to the USGS. I'm not sure who's on the call to address specifically, but Phil's wondering how this Michigan data is going to move to the new 3DHP.
Hey, Linda, this is Sue. I will grab that one for those not familiar in the hydrography data acquisition lead. I will say that we are in the midst of planning for timelines for next fiscal year, and we're working on a prototype data model. The data model will define how we plan to move data into the new data set. So I guess the answer is to be determined. We'll let you guys know as soon as we have something put together.
Great. And I believe that's the last. If anybody had a question I did not address, please speak up now. Any additional questions from the community? All right. If we have no more, again, I want to thank the speakers. So appreciate it. You guys are on a leading edge here. So as you can see by the participation and the questions, there's a great deal of both interest and appreciation for the work you're doing. You'll see some accolades in the chat. I don't have to repeat those. And so unless there's any other calling last time, any comments, questions, suggestions? All right, with that, we will end the July forum, and I want to thank you all for your continued participation and encourage you to consider attending the NSGIC annual conference, where there'll be more discussion on these topics and others. So if you that'll be the end of September 19th through the 25th. You'd think I'd have these dates down. So please consider joining us. Thank you all.